Can I give one testimony?
Yes, you may.
I visited with someone, this is just to lend some credence to what he's saying here. I visited with someone who these guys prayed for deliverance. And it's been absolutely life-changing. Absolutely, like flipping a switch for them. That's just how real it is. I just want to say that because it's really true.
I will say everyone we've ever ministered to has been a little bit different. However, it's always positive. Not that everything in life always works out great. It doesn't flip your life around to where you're on top of the mountain and you never come down. It's not like that. But it certainly takes away the things that are
freedom.
It gives you freedom.
Gives you freedom.
Gives you freedom. And it all depends on the reaction. All depends on the person as well. So that's good to hear. I'm glad to hear that. And we are glad to say we're getting busier with that ministry. So more and more people come to us.
There's no end to that line,
Oh, I know. Just convincing people that they need it and that it's okay to come get help. All right. Tonight, I want to start back in Matthew. We were talking about going through the gospel. Specifically, so far, we're going through the Gospel of Matthew. And we're looking at instances where Jesus encountered demons, and we're seeing what we can learn from these instances. So, this passage we're going to look at is about the Canaanite or the Syrophoenician woman's daughter. It's Matthew 15, Matthew chapter 15. Starts in verse 22. It's also found in Mark, but we're going to look at the version in Matthew for that. Does that ring a bell to anybody? Syrophoenician woman? It's kind of an unusual name. Syrophoenician, is that? Okay, thought maybe it might pop into someone's head. I remember that in Sunday school. Okay. So let me just read this really quickly. Starting in verse 22, Matthew 15, 22. And a Canaanite woman, let me stop right there. Are you aware of what a Canaanite was? What type of person a Canaanite was?
Pagan? Are they pagan?
Yes.
Yeah.
So basically, everything that you read in the Gospels that Jesus did, you kind of have to frame it in his world and his worldview and what it was like in his world at the time. And he lived in the Jewish state of Israel. Not only was everybody that lived there pretty much Jewish, but that was basically the national religion. So it had to do with politics. It permeated into that. If you were a religious leader, you were also a political leader. Everything in their society, their whole culture, was wrapped around their religion, where they worshipped Yahweh, which is just the one true God. They were, at the time, at least when Abraham's day, all the other religions around them were polytheistic, meaning they believed in more than one God. How many of you were here when the guy from India was here, the missionary, and he mentioned how many gods they have in the Hindu religion? I can't even remember how many thousands and thousands they had. Might have even been millions, possibly. So that was one thing that caused them to stand apart from everybody else that was surrounded them. Well, how many of you guys remember what happened after they left Egypt? Do you remember they were captive? The house of Israel, or the children of Israel, were all captive in Egypt. If you're old like me and you remember watching the Ten Commandments every year when it came on, Charlton Heston, they came out of there and they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, and then they went into the Promised Land. What was the name of the Promised Land before it ended up becoming Israel?
Canaan.
The land of Canaan, right? So Canaan was a pagan land, and he told them to take that land and basically conquer the land, and that would be their land flowing with milk and honey. So this Canaanite woman was considered a non-Jew. She was considered a pagan. She was pretty much as low as you can get as far as, socially looking. This person is like almost non-existent. So you certainly wouldn't want to be seen with somebody like that, let alone talking with them and maybe even helping them. So, back to the scripture. Verse 22, and a Canaanite woman, gotta stop there again. Women were not really they were pretty subservient in that day. You may have heard somebody preach about the woman at the well and why Jesus was talking to her. Why she was so surprised he was talking to her. She said, well, first of all, I'm a Samaritan, I'm not a Jew, and I'm also a woman, and you're talking to me? Because men just didn't talk to women like that, because women were kind of like servant class at that time. So, a Canaanite woman, so she's got the worst of both worlds. She's a female and she's a Canaanite. From that region came out and began to cry out, saying, now notice she's crying out. That she's not like, excuse me, Mr. Jesus, excuse me, pardon me. If you're not busy, could you hate to bother you? What like that? She was crying out. She was yelling and screaming and trying at the top of her lungs to get his attention. So she came out and began crying out, saying, have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is cruelly demon-possessed. I'm going to stop there again. Have mercy on me. Why is she having to say, or in her mind, why is she asking for mercy? Because Jesus is up here. He's a Jew. She knows her place is down here. And so talking to someone out of respect, she's like, please have mercy on me. I'm acknowledging that you're more powerful than I am. And it's interesting because she called him Lord, Son of David. And I think we might have mentioned this before. Whenever they refer to Jesus as Son of David, what was that saying? It's like a title. Do you remember what it is? It's acknowledging that he was the Messiah. Because the Messiah was going to be of the lineage of David. So sometimes he's called Son of Man, sometimes he's called Son of God, sometimes he's called a lot of different things. But when he's called Son of David, that's somebody acknowledging, oh, you're the Messiah. So she's giving him credit as being the Messiah. So she says, have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is cruelly demon-possessed. Now I'm just going to take a wild guess here that she probably wasn't the only one. Probably wasn't the only one trying to get Jesus' attention at the time. So she probably out-screamed everybody and out-jumped and shouted and whatever to get his attention. But it was very important to her. And why was it so important? Because she needed help for her daughter. If you have children, you understand how that is. You may need help for yourself, but if your child needs help, that's a whole different story, right? Okay. So she is doing everything she can to get his attention. But said he did not answer her a word. Oh, well, that's not what you'd expect Jesus to do, right? Jesus was kind and loving, and he was never mean to people, right? Jesus wasn't like that. Why would he ignore her? I mean, that's kind of the root of, not the root, that's kind of about as rude as you can get. If I walk up to you on the street or in a store or something, and I talk to you, and I say, hey, how are you doing today, or whatever, and you just go, you just totally ignore me and don't say a word, how do you think I'm going to feel?
Mad.
Be mad. Or upset, or in some way feel slighted and rejected. So was Jesus really rejecting her? No, he didn't reject her. So why do you think he was quiet? Why do you think he didn't answer her a word? Just a thought.
Good
I mean, I
listener?
have a good answer. What?
Good listener?
Because who's the good listener?
Jesus.
Because he's a good listener? That's possible.
He says it's because he was sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel.
Well, you're reading ahead.
But well, you know the story.
I
So I don't know that I always feel like he was doing something there. He wasn't really saying,
Right,
I
he
won't
didn't-
talk to you because of that.
If Jesus said something, he was doing it to make a point. So if he didn't say something, he was doing it to make a point as well. One of the points probably he was making was, it's not that I don't love you and care about you, but I am here for the house of Israel. I'm here for God's people. They were called God's people. So in today's society, you'd say, well, Christians are God's people, but back then, the Jews were God's chosen people. They still are God's chosen people. But so they were the apple of God's eye. So he's saying, I'm here for God's children. I'm not here for you right now. But he didn't say that at first. He didn't say a word to her. He let her holler and yell at him. He heard exactly what she said, but he didn't answer. Now his disciples, on the other hand, came to him and implored him, saying, send her away because she keeps shouting at us. Imagine that, a man not wanting to be shouted at by a woman. Get this, woman away because she keeps yelling at me. Right? Oh, honey, I'm sorry. Did I say that out loud? So
Every day.
Yeah,
every day. No, I'm just kidding about that. But the shouting part, she just kept shouting, and they just wanted her to be quiet because, as far as they were concerned, it was a disruption. They were sort of like the entourage that followed Jesus around, and they were trying to keep the crowd back and trying to, make sure the right people got here to be prayed, up to Jesus to get prayed for, different things. So they thought they were helping Jesus out. So they weren't apparently able to dissuade this woman. So they came to Jesus and said, you're going to have to do something. Send her away. You're going to have to tell her because she's not listening to us. She just keeps shouting at us. And he answered and said, and it's funny because it doesn't say who he answered. I don't know if he answered the disciples or if he answered the woman. Because it said it was the disciples that spoke to him that said he answered. So maybe he didn't answer her directly. Maybe he was answering her through the disciples talking to them. I'm not sure. But he answered and said, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. But she came and began to bow down before him. Now this is interesting because I'll bet you if you were there, she was the only one, I'll bet, that was prostrate, that was bowed down. I bet nobody else was. I bet none of the religious people, none of God's people, none of the apple of God's eye, they weren't bowing down. They were following him around and listening to him, but they were keeping their dignity. They didn't want to get down on the ground and put their face down on the ground and make themselves undignified. But this woman didn't have a problem with that. Why not? This woman had an agenda that day. She said, I'm going to get to Jesus and I'm going to get him, in what form or fashion, I'm going to get him to save my daughter from this terrible thing that she's afflicted with. So, being that she was so desperate, that's the word I was kind of looking for, she was so desperate that she was willing to do just about anything. Also, by getting down and bowing before him, she was paying homage to him and she was recognizing him as someone greater than herself.
That's right.
Now, when we think of bowing, we think of bowing before God. You don't ever think about bowing before man. But in that day, it was not uncommon to bow before somebody who was of a higher stature than what you were. So she was giving him recognition as being someone great. So she bowed before him when nobody else seemed to be bowing before him, but she did. Even after he told her that he was sent only for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So basically he's already said, sorry, you don't qualify, right? But she wasn't going to be dissuaded by that. So she got down, bowed down before him, saying, Lord, help me. So now she's calling him Lord. Again, that's another term of, you're greater than I am. It's like master. Lord, help me. And he answered and said, he's already told her, I can't help you because you're not one of them. But she kept it up. And he answered and said, it's not good to take the children's bread. Meaning, I'm here to give things to the house of Israel, to the children of Israel. They are the children. They're God's chosen ones. So it's not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. Right? Does that make sense? So if you had somebody over to visit and you had very little food and this person had just dropped in, you didn't even know them, and they just popped into your house and you're like, I would love to give you something from our supper table, but I have to feed the kids first. They have to have what they need first. Nobody would think that was bad. Nobody would think that was wrong. Would you? So Jesus was in effect saying saying the same thing. So she responds to him. So that's twice. He shot her down twice, right? He said, I'm only here for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Shot her down once there. Then he said, it's not good to give the children's bread to the dogs. That's the second time he's denied her. She's still not going away. So about this time, the disciples are probably going, see, I tried to tell you. She won't shut up. She's just... So, she said, yes, Lord, but even the dogs feed on the crumbs which fell from their master's table. Then Jesus said to her, now notice before it didn't say he said to her, so I think he was talking straight to the disciples before, but now she's got his full-on attention, and he turns and looks at her, and he says to her, O woman, your faith is great. It shall be done for you as you wish. And her daughter was healed at once. So she was up against a third strike. She'd already got 2 strikes from Jesus. He'd already told her no twice. And here she's thinking he's the Messiah and, the ultimate king. And she still won't leave him alone. Keeps going back. And it paid off in the end. He said, your faith is great. It shall be done for you as you wish. And her daughter was healed at once. Well, what was her daughter healed from? Demon possession. Or if I think I was reading to you out of, New American Standard, if you read that in the King James, it would say she's cruelly vexed by the devil. So remember when I told you that even the King James doesn't take that exact same word and call it possessed every time. That's one of the times when they did not call it possessed. It's the exact same word that they always translate as possessed. Most of the time, then they got to that part and they said vexed.
The New King James does.
Does say what?
Demon possession.
Does it?
But if you look at the Greek, it's demonized under the power of the demon.
Right. And I haven't used that word as much as I probably should have, but really the word demonized means, it's the best descriptive word that we have. And it, like I said, it covers the whole gamut from somebody who's just barely affected to somebody who is completely stark raving mad out of their mind, like the demoniac at gatherings. So if you use the word demonized, like I said, it means under the influence of a demon in some way. It does not mean that you're frothing at the mouth, and it doesn't mean that your head's going to spin around, you're going to spit out pea soup. It doesn't mean that you're going to jump on somebody and beat the tar out of them, 7 of them that are trying to cast a demon out of you, and send them running naked out of the house. It simply means, in some form or fashion, to one degree or another, you are under the effect of a demon. Now, a lot of people disagree with me, but I think the vast majority of Christians are demonized to some degree or another. If they don't think they are, maybe they're not, but more than likely they are. So why would you want to not be demonized? Why would you want to be set free from being demonized? Why is it even an issue? Your face is pretty much explains it. Like, why wouldn't you? Well, it's amazing how many people say, "Oh no, that's not. I don't have a problem." There's a lot of people with drug and alcohol problems that are addicted. And I don't have a problem. So just because you say you don't have a problem doesn't mean you don't have a problem. Sometimes other people see the problem and you don't. It's interesting that people would rather believe that some of the things that they do, some of the awful things that people do, are just because they're bad people. Like people that lash out and attack people, physically harm them, assault them, kill them, all that sort of thing. How many times do you hear on the news when they talk about something like that, and that person will say, the people they interview,
"You're going to spill your water."
Thanks.
Sorry.
The people they interview say, "Oh, that person's pure evil. Pure evil." And you're like, really? Is anyone pure evil? I don't think so. So if demons take a foothold in someone's life, then they start building up a stronghold or a kingdom in their life. Does that make sense? Even in the scripture, when it talks about the one leaving the house and coming back, finding the house clean and brought back 7 more worse than itself after the house was swept clean, they view a person as a house. They move in and that's their territory. That's the way they view it. And so what's the first thing? So let's say you're a teenage kid and all of a sudden you got the house to yourself. Mom and dad moved out of the country and you're left with the house. What's the very first thing as a teenage kid you're going to do?
Throw
a party and you're going to invite your friends over. And so that's exactly what they want to do. Because they can have a good time. And they can do a lot of destruction. Can you imagine what a house would look like after, about 60, 70 teenagers ransacked the place for the party? Hopefully you guys don't know from experience. From either being the parents or the children.
I have a question about that.
Yes.
So in your work, have you ever prayed for someone who only had one demon?
I don't think so. No.
I never have either. I just...
Yeah. Not that there's been a multitude. I mean, some people might have 2 or 3.
Right, because
Seems to be somewhere, on the whole, most people, a
Right.
couple to a dozen or so, something like that. Because each one of them have specific jobs that they do.
Right.
And so therefore, and some work together.
Well, that's what I was thinking, like one might be the initial, but then fear comes in to keep anyone from bothering that one, and
Right.
pride or anger or whatever comes in, religion comes in to try to so that nobody can get near the initial stronghold.
Right.
Right? Yeah.
Correct. So some of them, if you think about it, they sort of go hand in hand. Hopelessness,
Destruction.
destruction,
Suicide.
suicide, A lot of those things kind of work together. You can see, even a psychologist would say, oh, well, you know, once you get this thing happening in your life, then the next step's going to be this, and then this, and ultimately you're going to end up with suicidal thoughts. That's what they'll tell you. I was reading today again. I keep reading these blogs, and I probably shouldn't because some crazy stuff out there. But I like to read it from the world's perspective, from people who don't believe in and don't acknowledge Jesus, and see how they describe things that they're going through. And it's amazing how many times they use words like demon, evil, darkness. I can't seem to get out of this darkness, this deep pit that I'm in. I'm living in hell. They use those kind of terminology. And they don't realize that they're spot on when they say that. So it's interesting, but it's very sad to hear people talk about what they're going through, and that they talk about how their thoughts are, the racing thoughts, and how they have no control, and how they're just yo-yos back and forth. And often, I even saw one today where the lady was talking about that she finally figured out that I can't remember how she put it, her mind was compartmentalized into two entities. And she said one is like, she didn't call it the real me, the good me, whatever. She said she had this other one. And somebody kind of explained that to her. Once they explained that to her, then over time, the next few years, more and more just kept popping. So she had different personalities, if you will. And she said, I finally got up to 12. And she said, they're all different. And she could describe them to a T. And she said, they're all part of me. Because that's what psychology tells you, is that that's all part of you. That your one personality splinters, and it goes off, and each different facet of your personality becomes an entity in your mind, if you will. But the danger, what's the danger of that? I mean, as a Christian, if you believe what I'm trying to tell you about demons, why is that so dangerous to believe? Because what's the psychologist going to tell you need to do if you've got all these personalities? What do they try to do? Combine it into one to make you back as a whole person. Well, the problem is you're taking something that's not you and you're trying to combine it with you, and that's a dangerous game to play. So this lady, and I was going to bring it and read it to you, and I thought, I can't even read it. The language was awful, and the description of, I mean, one was very sexually perverse, one was just out of control rage and anger, and it just went on and on. And some of them she said I like more than others, but she said I've learned to just give time to each one.
Oh, good Lord.
So she said throughout my day, I let this one take over. I would say manifest, but she said I let that one take over and have its time on the stage, basically. And then another one, and another one. And then it's just mind-boggling to think about that. But because science is trying to, and psychology is trying to explain something, totally ignoring the spirit world, you just can't do it. It's like I said before, you can't explain how the ventriloquist dummy works if you don't realize that there's a man standing there with his hand in it. Yeah, it's pretty magical if there's not a guy there with his hand in it, right? And that's what they're looking at. They're looking at it, they don't see the man with his hand there, holding up the nose. So like, how's its mouth moving, and how's its head turning, and how's it sitting up and not falling over and landing on the floor? Well, obviously there's a man standing there. Yes?
Yeah, so you're talking about the disassociation that psychologists say comes through trauma.
Correct.
We would say that indeed trauma does open doors,
Correct.
but it's not to a splintering necessarily of personality,
Right.
but it opens doors to demonic forces then that come in because of trauma.
Correct.
Right? Okay.
Correct. And the thing is, you can believe either way if you want to. But I find it interesting that the people who have been to psychologists and therapists and been through all this stuff, especially if you read somebody's like a blog where they've said, I'm going to just kind of chronicle my journey through this. They'll say, I got on meds and it took me a few weeks or a few days or whatever, but to get kind of leveled out, and I'm feeling so much better. I'm having less of these kind of thoughts. I'm having less of these, in this one lady's case, it was self-destructive thoughts. Less of all these things that were bad, but then you just keep reading. You got to keep reading, because later it comes back, and they're like, "Oh, wow! Now I'm back in it again." So it's I've never talked to anybody who said, "I've been to psychologists, I've been to therapy for 3 years, and I'm finally cured, and everything's great, That stuff never rears its ugly head, and I don't have to deal with it anymore. But I have seen people who have had issues and recognized it's demonic and got rid of the source, the root, and the issue's gone. It's not masked by medicine. It's not like holding the trash can lid down to keep Oscar the Grouch or the monster in the trash can, which gets tiring, and after a while you can't do it, and finally it starts coming up again. But you try and try and try to read your Bible and to, praise and worship music and pray more and more and keep that lid down. Well, nobody's that strong that they can do that. Even if King David was one of the most amazing men that ever lived, and he even had days where he just threw his hands up and he's just like, Lord, wow, don't understand. So it's pretty amazing that you find that when it's gone, that it truly was the source. Because you can tell by the fruit. Just like we're to judge people by their fruit, you can judge people by their fruit. Once the spirit that's causing something, whether it be self-loathing or whatever the case may be, suicidal thoughts, when that stuff's gone, it doesn't come back. Now, they may have other demons want to come in and try to convince them and say, oh, it didn't leave. But you say, well, I'm supposed to take every thought captive, submit to God, resist the devil, and he'll flee. You do, and that's gone. It's on the outside, so it's gone. It's no longer there. But it is truly a cure. It is not just something to mask the symptoms. All right, so I guess I'm off track. Let me get back. All right, Canaanite woman. Now, isn't it? What do you think was the reaction of the crowd when he said, oh, woman, your faith is great? Just that alone. What do you think that, first of all, why is he talking to a woman in public out loud? And secondly, what you talking about, Willis? Your faith is great. This woman has great faith. Do you not see my robe, and do you not see the fringes on my robe and the tassels? Do you not understand what kind of a holy man that I am? Because you know there were Pharisees and scribes and Sadducees that were following around. I guarantee you they were offended. They're calling her someone of great faith. Well, obviously he didn't see me standing back here because, oh, I'm one of the greatest faiths in this whole area, in the church. So I'm sure that probably wasn't met with a round of applause. But it says her daughter was healed at once. And again, we're overlapping healing and demonic or demonization. She said that her child was vexed by a demon or cruelly demon-possessed. It's interesting that she uses the word cruelly. That just brings a picture to my mind that's a horrible torment. And so she was healed because as soon as he said, your faith is great, it shall be done for you as you wish, that demon had the orders to go. It was gone. And it left. And she was healed at once. As soon as the demon was gone, again, the problem's gone. She's healed. Right? All right, Matthew 16. Moving on to another passage here.
Hey, can I make a comment before you get off on that?
No. Yeah, go ahead. Just kidding you. Go ahead.
Just concerning the Canaanite or Phoenician woman, the best explanation I've heard of Jesus' reaction there is that the address of Son of David is something that the Jews would use.
Right.
And that basically she was
Pretending.
under pretext that she was a Jew, which is why he ignored her.
That makes sense.
It does make sense, and that was the thing, he said that, and then she came back and she still wasn't acknowledging.
Right.
That she said, Lord, have mercy on me, and finally, when she does acknowledge that as far as the covenant goes, she's a dog, part of the, that she's not a part of the promised people, and because a lot of people teach that Jesus was testing her faith, and and, you know, it looks like he's making a meatball out of her, and then when he's
Yeah.
had his fun, he says, okay, you can have what you want, and I don't.
Yeah.
No, I don't believe he was cruel or
At
anything.
all like that.
Well, that makes good sense, because if you think about it, that would fit exactly, because her first statement could make him think that she was Jewish. In other words, so she probably knew that she would have the advantage and that she could get in there, and he would just say, oh, it's a Jewish woman, so I'll go ahead and meet her need. And then when he calls her on it, then her next statement was, oh, she bowed down before him and said, Lord, help me. And then when he answered and mentioned about the children's bread and the dogs, now she's like coming clean. Okay, I admit it. I'm not a Jew. I'm not one of the chosen people. But
what about
at any rate, help me.
how maybe even if she was Canaanite, what if she wanted to be Jew or in her heart? Because nowadays people that are other religions,
Well, and they could do that back then too. You could.
Yeah,
You
there's
could.
nothing to stop.
yeah,
Sure.
we don't know for a fact.
Except that she was a woman. I mean, there were lots of things that stopped women, but
Right.
I'm always so convicted in that story because that was pretty strong public kind of rebuttal. You know, that he just wasn't paying attention to her. I just think sometimes I'm too easily dissuaded. Like I want to be like her. I want to, maybe I don't understand, but I know what I need from God and I want to keep coming, you know, and I want to be more like her. And a lot of times I haven't been.
Well, and we're encouraged to do that because the scripture tells us about the widow that wanted justice.
That's right.
And in that case, it wasn't God she was talking to, it was an unjust judge. But the fact that she just flat wouldn't leave him alone, he finally was fed up with her. It seems to be a sort of a thread running through here about a theme of women. We'll just move on. But it's interesting that God says that because some people will say, I know when I was not first saved, when I first got spirit-filled, I was learning some things. I remember seeing a bumper sticker and I was just fascinated by it. It said, God said it, I believe it, and that settles it. And I don't remember where it came from, but and I was like, that is so cool. All I have to do is believe what God said, and it's over, it's done. That's just the way it is. But sometimes God said, you gotta keep at it, just keep doing it. It's not that I'm ignoring you, but for whatever reason, I don't know what the reason is, but just keep doing it.
Perseverance and
Keep
character
persevering.
and all that.
And you will eventually rise, like cream rise to the top and get God's attention. Although I think he knows the whole time. And I think he knows you're going to do that. And I don't think Jesus tested her to find out what she would do because I think obviously he knew ahead of
That's
time.
right.
Because I think he could sense it. I think he could have probably just looked at her without her saying a word and said, I can just see that faith in that woman.
Yeah.
And let's just let it play out in front of everybody so everyone else can see it. Because he could have just looked at her without her saying anything and say, your daughter's healed. And then just walked on. Nobody would have known what was happening. But she was invested in it.
Right.
You know, I know sometimes like we've had this discussion where at the school district where I work, because we have a one-to-one program with computers with high school kids, and we had a long discussion about should we charge the kids to have a computer or should we not charge them, and if so, how much should we charge? And it always comes up in the conversation, you don't want to not charge them because if they haven't given anything, if they have no ownership in it, then it doesn't mean much to them. They're not going to treat it well. So it's kind of the same here. Maybe Jesus said, you have some ownership for this healing. He'll let you earn this, not earn it, but some ownership so that you know that you have really tried instead of just going, oh, I just walked by and threw fairy dust and everything worked out great.
Well, we know at least one other time when Jesus was responding to someone and he prayed and he said, Father, I know that you always hear me, but for these.
I think it was
And then
Lazarus.
speaks it out, yeah, he speaks it out. And so he was aware that he was in a teaching moment all the time about
Right,
the
there
kingdom.
were always people
There were
watching.
always people watching and always more happening than the one person he was dealing with.
Right, exactly. And probably a lot of people missed a lot of things that he said and did because they weren't really focused and watching the little things that he did. So let's go to Matthew chapter 16. verse 18 and 19. You've all heard this probably if you've been in church any length of time. Matthew 16:18. I say to you that you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overpower it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall have been bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall have been loosed in heaven. And if you look at that, that was 18.
That was 19.
That was 18 and 19. That's what I was shooting for there. So it's interesting to me how that plays out. Again, I mentioned to you before that when he says Peter, some people says, you are Peter, and the word for Peter is the same word for rock. And he says, upon this rock, and I mentioned that here before, because I know, at least used to, I can't say about today in modern day, but Roman Catholics always believed that the Pope was a direct descendant of Peter. Had to be because of this verse right here. Because they think that he looked at Jesus, or that Jesus looked at him and said, Peter, you're the rock. And on this rock, I'm going to build my church. Well, that doesn't jive with me, because why would God build his rock, or build his church on a rock of a man that was imperfect? All men are imperfect. Why would you build it on an imperfect human? And if you don't believe it, then just watch later how Peter reacts. And Peter does some bad stuff, and he's not a good disciple. As a matter of fact, at one point, Jesus even looked at him and said, Satan, get behind me. Was he talking to Peter? Remember when Jesus said that to him? Who was Jesus talking to when he said that? I know we're on a different verse.
He was talking to the enemy.
He was talking to the enemy. He was talking to a spirit that was influencing Peter. So even Peter was demonized. You know, Peter, the Apostle Peter, the great and mighty Apostle Peter, he was even demonized.
And that demon, Jesus said, was to put the things of man before the things of God.
Right. That was his job,
Yeah.
exactly, in that case. Yep. So what he was saying was he used two different words. He said, you are Peter, and that word meant a small rock, a stone that you pick up. But on this rock, I'll build my church. When he said on this rock, I think he was pointing to himself, because the word for rock there means like a huge cliff face, something that's totally immovable, that you couldn't, not a big boulder, like a whole cliff face on the side of the mountain that's made out of rock. So he was explaining, and he said the gates of Hades or the gates of hell will not overpower it. So that means that when he builds his church, the gates of Hades or the gates of hell will not overpower it. That's where we are today. We are the church, and it says right here, the gates of Hades will not overpower it. Now, will they try? Absolutely. Try very hard. But he says, I give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall have been bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall have been loosed in heaven. So I love that verse, because he's saying, I'm giving you the responsibility. He said, I could do it all for you, but I'm not going to. I'm going to hand you the keys, and you're 16 now, you're old enough to drive, you're responsible, and I expect you to use them accordingly. I don't expect you to go do bad things and go places you shouldn't go. I expect you to take those keys and use them for the intention and the purpose that I intended you to use them for. So he has given those keys to the keys of the kingdom to the church, so that whatever we bind on earth will be bound in heaven, whatever we loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. And what do you think that really means? I've heard different explanations for the binding and loosing. What do you think it refers to bind something on earth? Any ideas? Because there could probably be more than one interpretation of this. I know there could
To
be.
make it so, to solidify it.
Okay. Can you think of any examples off the top of your head? I don't want to put you on the spot, but
Well, I mean, whatever good acts that he would do.
okay. So anything you're saying, it kind of put the final seal on it, stamped it, if you will. All right. I think sometimes it may have to do with, since it's binding and loosing, then I think it has to do with what happens if you bind a person. They can't do anything. They can't function. They can't get over. They can't do anything, right? Or you probably wouldn't be scared if you walked up to somebody and they were completely bound, no matter how big and bad that person was. It could be a gang member or whatever, and you're not going to be afraid of them. Now, if they were loosed all of a sudden, that's a whole different story. So you might be scared of something that was loosed. So loosing something gives it the freedom to move and do what it needs to do. And here's a rabbit trail because I know you expect one. So this is there's only one, this is good trivia here. There's only one word in the English language, and this is it, that you can put UN in front of, and it doesn't change the meaning of the word. You can tie your shoe or you can untie your shoe. Those are opposites, right? Everything you put "un" in front of means the opposite. But to loose something means to make it more free. To unloose something means to make it more free. I learned this in a college class, and I didn't believe you, and I went and looked it up. That's back before we had Google. And so it took me a little longer. And it's the same with loosen. I said one word, loosen is the same. So you can loosen something or you can unloosen something.
And that
It's
doesn't
the
make
exact
sense.
same thing. But look it up.
I know, there was something I looked it up. It still don't make sense.
I know, it's crazy. It's like, because, well, the opposite of tight. See, you think unloose would be to tighten, but it's not. So that's free. So we're going to write that down before I erase it. Anyone? Anyone?
I just remembered.
Bueller? I said that to see if there was anybody in my generation who know what Bueller is. It's a town in Kansas, right? All right. Sorry, I should be of the world, or in the world, not of the world, so please forgive me for knowing that Ferris Bueller's Day Off reference. I was young and, you know.
Did I lose?
Yeah.
Or unloose.
Yeah. So don't ever get in an argument with somebody about loose, unloose, because you're just arguing the same thing. It's like rabbit season, duck season. Again, anyone remember that reference? Rabbit season, duck season. If you don't know that from Looney Tunes, you need to go look it up. Yes, that is classic TV literature, if you will. There, that's as close to literature as I get. I'm not being rude. All right, moving on. Now that I embarrassed myself.
It's sort of like, what's the word, no, see, that's not irrespective, but what's that word?
Irregardless.
Irregardless.
My son and one of his friends have a joke about that, and one just says it to just irritate the other one. I think it's my son that says it too. You know who I'm talking about? It's Logan. And
Regardless and irregardless.
he'll just go say something, but irregardless, and it just blows his stack. Anyway, I guess if you can't laugh at words, you just.
Yeah, our son's just like him. Can you imagine?
It's not just like me. In a lot of ways, though. So binding and loosing. So what does that have to do with demonic stuff? I didn't see the word demon in there anywhere. But that's okay. You know, I can find these demons. I can dig them out of the scriptures where nobody else sees them, right? But it's okay because we already said the word demon doesn't even exist in the King James Bible. So if you're a King Jamesian, if you will, then it doesn't even exist. They call them devils instead. So binding and loosing. Why is it important to know about binding and loosing? Because there's a place later when Jesus talks about the strong man. And he said, if you go into someone's house, how can you go into someone's house and ransack, take all this stuff, unless you first bind the strong man? Because I guarantee you, in America, you're going to run into somebody with a gun more than likely. You break into someone's house in the middle of the night, you're probably going to meet a man with a gun. Well, at least in this area of the country you would. Maybe not. Where other places in the country, can't speak for them. But, so if they wanted to steal everything in a house around here, they're probably going to have to tie the owner up, right? Because that owner is not going to be happy and he is going to not give up and let them just take all this stuff. So if they bound the owner, then they could take everything they wanted out of the house, right? So in this case, in the case of being demonized, who would be the strong man? Well, first of all, what's the house? We talked about the house a lot. A house would be a person. So the occupant of that person would be a demon, a demonic spirit, right? So if a person was demonized, there was a demon in there, who's the strong man?
The demon.
The demon. Right? So if you bind that demon, because you can, because it says right here, whatever you bind on earth, and that demon's on earth because he's in a person, and that person's on earth, unless he's some kind of weird alien or something, that's a whole nother, I don't want to get into that. So, you're binding it on earth, and it's being bound in heaven. And I love the past tense version of this. It says, whatever you bind on earth shall have been bound in heaven. So it makes me go back to the one before that where he says, great is your faith, it shall be done for you. So it's being done, and the way it's written here, where it says, if you bind it on earth, it shall have been bound in heaven. So basically, instantly, as soon as you do it, bam, you got the backing of all of heaven, the powers of heaven. God is backing you up in the Holy Spirit. I believe that's what it's meant by binding. Mm-hmm. Now, do you want to loose it? You don't want to go in somewhere and loose a demon, right? Mm. That's not a good thing. They're already going to loose on their own. They're doing whatever they want to do. So, what would you want to loose, possibly? You want to loose the person, but what else? I'm thinking in the spirit realm. What would you? What entity might you want to loosen?
Holy Spirit.
Holy Spirit, or what are the ministering spirits that come in?
Angels.
You might want to minister angels to deal with the situation. As a matter of fact, we had a situation one time. It was we were doing our ministry, and it was just one of those times when it was being very, the Spirit was being very, how do I want to say, resistant to going. And I said, Lord, send a couple angels down to escort these demons on their way. And I saw nothing, I heard nothing, but I saw the reaction on the person's face.
Awesome.
And I watched what they did, and when it was over, that person said, did you see that? And I said, what? And they said, did you see the two angels? There was one on each side, standing right here. And I said, when? And they said, when you said what you said. And I'm like, it's one of those where you're, yeah, I knew that.
It really worked.
Because we're not supposed to be surprised when we pray and it comes,
Sometimes
it happens. But, still sometimes and you're like, whoa. So that person said that, and it was amazing. That person had an amazing time after that. And I said, because I like to ask people questions too many times, I guess, but in this case I said, so how do you feel in this? I just amazing. I just feel like praising Jesus right now. So, go for it. So that's how you know that which was repressing them and holding them down, demonizing them, is gone, because now it's like they're free, and their spirit can breathe, and it can be liberated, if you will. So I just thought I'd throw that little part in there.
It's a great story.
Kind of interesting. So, all right. So binding and loosing. So you can loose spirits to help, or you can loose, which would be, in my opinion, calling on angels. Which we don't command angels, so don't get me wrong. But you can ask God, please send a ministering spirit or whatever to take care of that. I've heard lots of different stories of angels that have intervened and saved people's lives, or scared people off that were going to harm someone else. There's all sorts of different things. Not that we have to do that, not that we have to call for that, but sometimes that's the vehicle that God uses to minister to us or to help us. And I don't know why that came to me. Maybe it was the Holy Spirit that day that made me think to say that when I did. But apparently it worked, because there was a breakthrough right then. So binding and loosing, that's what binding and loosing has to do with. And when it says whatever you bind or loose on heaven is bound or loose, or on earth, whatever you bind or loose on earth is bound or loose in heaven. Well, that's just telling you that the power is with you. Because we don't carry any power of our own. As Christians, we don't have any power. I mean, we're just people, and we walk around, and God loves us, and we're imperfect, and we do a lot of, and I'm talking about all of us Christians. So we really don't have power. The power is from the Holy Ghost, when the power of the Holy Ghost came upon them on the day of Pentecost. But we do have the authority.
That's right.
So there's a difference. The authority says there's somebody with power that says, I'll back you up. You just call on me, and I got your back. I'll be there for you. That's what Jesus was saying. That I will back you up whenever you do these things. Whenever you encounter the enemy and you call on me, you bind, you loose, and I'll be there to back it up with the power.
It's good.
I don't think it would be a good idea for God to have given us the power. I think we would all be messed up.
Oh,
You've heard power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So I think it would really mess with people. So, you know, you have to understand that whatever ministry you do, whether you're ministering to the kids in the nursery or you're doing the kind of ministry we do or you do, or anything in between, hopefully not in the same place, hopefully you don't have little kids yet. I'm just kidding. They'll never let me go in the nursery. Oh, that's not a bad thing. I'm not a nursery person. My wife's good in the nursery. I'm not tolerant enough for little kids. But I digress. So, anyway, I'm just going to move on. Basically, what you say, I'm backing up.
right,
Yeah.
that's right.
So,
That's good.
and there's so many things that it's the key to so many things in healing and all that. The first thing is God says it, we agree with it or believe it to be true, and then we confess it and we say it. And when we do, then boom, that's when go, your daughter's healed, or
That's right.
your servant is healed, whatever.
That's good.
All sorts of things like that. Not always speaking, but usually it's speaking. But sometimes it's pick up your mat and walk. It just all sort of depends, because there's various ways, but it's always something physical on our part we have to do. But words are very, very powerful,
So powerful.
and we don't have a clue how
That's
powerful words
revelation,
are.
God.
All right. So in Matthew chapter 17, verse 14 through 21, talks about a boy with a demon, and it throws him in the fire and the water, and the disciples can't cast it out. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I want to read it and make a couple of comments. Starting in chapter 17, verse 14, when they came to the crowd, a man came up to Jesus, falling on his knees before him, and saying, Lord, have mercy on my son. This all sounds really familiar. The woman came to Jesus and fell down before him and said, have mercy. Have mercy on my son, for he is a lunatic and very ill. Now, when I say lunatic, it doesn't mean something derogatory like we would mean it if we said lunatic in today's language. It means that his mental process is messed up. He's demonized. And he's very ill. For he often falls into the fire and often into the water. It doesn't indicate that he's got a problem with his balance. He doesn't fall all the time. He only falls into the water and into the fire. What happens if you fall into the water? You have the potential of drowning. What happens if you fall in the fire? You have the potential of drying back out after you finish, of getting burned up. So both of those are harmful, and we don't want either one of those. You would naturally, if you're walking by the fire, you don't run into the fire. Although I understand just a couple of weeks ago, what is that? Burning Man? What do they call that festival?
Yeah.
Burning Man, that there was a guy that ran into the fire and they had to try to pull him out.
Oh.
Oh, that's good.
Anyway, that's neither here nor there. So ordinarily we don't run into the fire and we don't fall into the water. If you get in the water, it's on purpose and you're under control. You have it under control. You're going to dive in and you're prepared to swim, but not just fall into the water. So obviously something was bothering this kid that was causing this to happen, right? So he often falls in the fire and often in the water. I brought him to your disciples and they could not cure him. What do you think the problem with it was? Do you think the father knew what the problem with the son was? Do you think he thought he had a disease? Do you think he thought he had something medical wrong with him? Or do you think he thought there was a spiritual root to it? I think he thought there was a spiritual root to it. He took him to the disciples and said they could not cure him. And Jesus answered and he said, you unbelieving and perverted generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring him here to me. Has anybody ever felt like God's talked to you like that? I think often for me. How long am I going to put up with you? You are a slow learner. Moving on. Bring him here to me, he said. And how long shall I be with you? In other words, Jesus is saying, I'm not going to be here forever. I'm going to be here 3.5 years with you, so you have really got to pay attention. Because when I'm gone, you're going to have to know this stuff. That's kind of what Jesus was trying to get across to him. Sounds like he's being mean, but he's just trying to drive this point home. So, Jesus, bring him here to me, Jesus said. So, Jesus rebuked him, and the demon came out of him, and the boy was cured at once. So, Jesus took care of it like that. The disciples couldn't take care of it like that, but they're just immature. They're just babies at this point. They don't really understand everything that's happening like Jesus does. So Jesus said, I don't have time to teach you and train you on this particular kid. I'm just going to do it, and we're going to move on. And Jesus rebuked him, and the demon came out of him, and the boy was cured at once. Again, as soon as the demon left, which was the root cause, he was cured at once. He's not cured weeks later, months later, doesn't just taper off and go away. He's cured. Then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, why could we not drive it out? And he said to them, because of the littleness of your faith, for truly I say to you, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible to you. And some references add to that, this kind does not go out except by prayer and fasting. And it depends on the manuscript that the Bible version translation came from. Some have that last part and some don't about it. Some go out only by prayer and fasting. If that's part of it, prayer and fasting, well then didn't Jesus just disprove that statement? Jesus wasn't praying and fasting. He didn't come across a demon and go, okay, everybody break, we got to pray and fast. 3 days, 7 days. He didn't do that. Why did Jesus not have to do that? He said the disciples would have had to pray and fast, if you're going to go with that verse. What was different? Why would they have had to pray and fast and Jesus didn't?
Maybe just teaching them to be patient. Or to
Maybe.
be vigilant.
Well, one of the things that happens to human beings when they fast is that you become so spiritually sensitive. You have such a clear connection with the Lord. And I've always thought that that's what he was saying, is that we need to get a whole lot more clarity on board to deal with this thing, and I think he walked in that all the time.
Right. Yeah, exactly. He walked in that all the time. He was up before anyone else. He was in the garden. He was praying, talking to the Father. He was constantly, and I'm sure he was fasting on a regular basis as well. So Jesus lived that lifestyle. He was trying to teach them how to do it, but they hadn't quite gotten there yet. So it's not that literally a person would have had to pray and fast at that moment or for so many days to get about that demon to come out. If they were living the kind of lifestyle that Jesus
That's
was,
good. Yeah.
then they wouldn't have had to do that.
It's the lifestyle.
It's
Yeah.
the lifestyle. And he said, because of the littleness of your faith, and then it goes on, if, like I said, if you're going to go with that verse that says, they only got by prayer and fasting, well then if he said, your faith's too little, so then you need to pray and fast. Well, that tells me that prayer and fasting must increase my faith, right? You talk about how with your spirit, how did you put that just now? When you fasted?
For me, it's kind of like telling my soul, sit down and shut up,
Right.
and then my spirit man comes to the
Takes-
forefront,
Right.
and I have really clear communion with God.
So, and when you have more clear communion with God like that, your faith also
Your faith
rises.
just rises.
Because the closer you are with God at any moment, the easier it is to believe everything He says. Because you're not looking at the circumstances. That's all. You're not even looking. You have blinders on. You're just looking at Jesus, and you can see nothing but power and divinity and godliness, and it's easy to believe. Jesus is standing right there in front of you. So I just wanted to toss that in. All right, I'm going to jump ahead because I really want to talk about, and this is actually in, I think, 3 different Gospels. Which one am I going to talk about here? The man and the Gadarenes. So let's look at Mark for this chapter, for this particular one. Look in the book of Mark, chapter 4, starting verse 35. Mark 4:35. This has got to be one of my favorite demonization stories in the whole Gospels. And you may wonder, and I'll explain in a minute. You may wonder why I'm starting where I'm starting, but I'll explain here in a minute. Mark 4:35. On that day, when evening came, he said to them, meaning Jesus said to the disciples, "Let's go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd, they took him along with them in the boat, just as he was, and other boats were with him. And there arose a fierce gale of wind, and the waves were breaking over the boat, so much that the boat was already filling up. Jesus himself was in the stern, asleep on the cushion, and they woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we're perishing, we're dying?" And he got up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Hush, be still." And the wind died down and became perfectly calm. And he said to them, "Why are you afraid? You still have no faith?" They became very much afraid and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the waves and the sea obey him? Who is this?" Then they came to the other side. They came to the other side of the sea, into the country of the Gerasenes. When he got out of the boat, immediately a man from the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. And he had his dwelling among the tombs, and no one was able to bind him anymore, even with a chain, because he had often been bound with shackles and chains, and the chains had been torn apart by him, and the shackles broken in pieces, and no one was strong enough to subdue him. Constantly, night and day, he was screaming among the tombs and in the mountains, and gashing himself or cutting himself with stones. Seeing Jesus from a distance, he ran and bowed down before him. And shouting with a loud voice, he said, "What business do we have with each other, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I implore you, by God, do not torment me." For he had been saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And he was asking him, "What is your name?" And he said to him, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he began to implore him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now there was a large herd of swine feeding nearby on the mountain. The demons implored him, saying, "Send us into the swine so that we can enter them." Jesus gave them permission. And coming out, the unclean spirits entered the swine, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the sea, and about 2,000 of them, and they were drowned in the sea. The herdsmen ran away and reported that in the city and in the country, and the people came to see what had happened. They came to Jesus and observed the man who had been demon-possessed or demonized, sitting down, clothed in his right mind, the very man who had had the legion, and they became frightened. Those who had seen it described to them how it happened about the demon-possessed man, and about all the swine. And the crowd began to implore him, Jesus, to leave the region. As he was getting back in the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed was imploring him that he might accompany him, and he did not let him. But Jesus said to him, "Go home to your people and report to them what great things the Lord has done for you, and how he had mercy on you." And he went away and began to proclaim in Decapolis what great things Jesus had done for him. And everyone was amazed. When Jesus crossed over again in the boat to the other side, a large crowd gathered around him, so he stayed by the seashore. Now, why did I start and end where I did? What happened at the beginning? Where are they? 35. On that day, evening came, he said to them, "Let us go over to the other side." They jumped in the boat, they head over. Where do I end it? When Jesus had crossed over again in the boat to the other side, a large crowd gathered around him. So, what all happened when he was in that area of the Gerasenes? He hopped in the boat, he comes over, he lands on the shore, he deals with this demoniac, and then he gets in the boat and he leaves. There's a couple of really important things about that. One, that was the first time, you can call it a missionary journey if you will, because that was the first time he stepped out of Jewish territory. When he went over to where Decapolis was, and where the Gerasenes were, that was not Jewish territory. So he's already said, "Hey, I came here first for the Jews, right? I'm here for the children of God." Now, you want to know why this is my favorite story? Because watching the way it unfolds and the way it lays out, it tells me a story about this man. And the story is, the man, kind of like the Syrophoenician widow, or Syrophoenician woman, she's not deserving, she's not one of God's people. or she wasn't, and this man is the same. He's a heathen. He's not one of the Jews. So why did Jesus say, let's go over there? Did Jesus know what was going to happen on the other side when he went over there?
Yes.
But they didn't. Nobody knew but Jesus. Jesus knew why he was going over there. Who do you think told Jesus to go over there? God, because Jesus said, I don't do anything except what I hear the Father tell me to do. So why do you think God the Father told Jesus to go over there for that man? What do you think was going on with the man or the man's family? You think maybe somebody was crying out to God, either him or his mother or somebody on his behalf? Or all of them. And even though they weren't worthy, they were still sinners, they were still heathen, God heard it. And not only did he answer the prayer, he sent Jesus, took Jesus away from his own people over here, sent him across to do just that. And I know that that's why that he sent him specifically to that man, because Jesus didn't do anything else while he was over there. And he said, it's time to get back in the boat, let's go over. It was a one-mission trip. So that there's a lot, yes.
I was sitting under a pastor several years ago. He was talking on this verse. He liked to kind of make jokes and stuff while he was preaching. He said this was also the first case of double ham.
Double ham. That's good. First case. Might be the only case. I don't think I ever read that again. All right. So, a couple of things we want to learn from that. If God loved that man who was so steeped in wickedness, and think about it, the man probably didn't start out that way. He probably got a demon, and he probably was doing things he wasn't supposed to do, living a sinful lifestyle, and probably got deeper and deeper into sin and kept opening doors, and the demons just kept coming in, until in the end, he couldn't even do what he wanted. It wasn't his life anymore because he was basically, cutting himself, like people do self-harm today. He was out of his mind. His thoughts were racing. He was running, screaming, naked through the woods, through the tombs. Nobody could bind him. He was just certifiably insane, basically, by that point. But yet, I think he probably had moments of clarity. And probably in those moments of clarity, he had enough clarity to cry out to God. That's what I believe. And if not, maybe his mother did. I don't know. But obviously he did. Now, so why is that all important? Well, the storm. What caused the storm? You hear it preached about the storm, right? In the storm, they're always talking about having faith and rebuking the winds and the waves and all this stuff and how they almost died. But put it into context. Jesus had one thing in mind to do. I'm only going over here to free this man, to see this man freed from these 2,000 demons. Then you think it was just coincidence that there was a storm? You think they didn't know he was coming? Oh, they knew. So, what do you think caused the storm? Now keep in mind, there are the privates, if you will, in the army of demons, and then there are more higher territorial spirits that are more powerful as you go up. I think the territorial spirits found out about it and said, we're going to stop it before this man gets free, and we're going to bust up this boat, and we're going to sink it, and if they're lucky, they'll wash to shore and survive, but if they don't, that's okay too. Now you say to yourself, well, I don't think that's true. Well, I'll tell you why I think it's true. 2 reasons. One, if you look back at the account of Job, and I think it's in the first chapter of Job, when God says, have you considered my servant Job? He says that to Satan. And Satan says, okay, but it's only because you have put a hedge around him, a protection. God says, okay, I'm going to remove that, and I'm going to let you do to him as you please, as long as you, short of taking his life. And if you watch what happened, how did he lose his children? You remember the story of how it was a storm. A wind came along and blew down the structure of the house that they were in and fell on them. So a storm, more than likely, was more likely a storm. So they have some sort of powers over nature. I'm not saying every storm is caused by demonic forces, but they do have power to do that. It's also what makes me think that is the way Jesus reacted. What did Jesus do? When they woke him up, he wasn't really concerned. He was sleeping fine. He knew he didn't have to worry about anything. Sleeping fine. And they said, oh, we're going to die. And Jesus gets up, and I got to go back.
Calm down. It was in the waters.
He calmed them, but how did he do it? That's what I was
spoke to it.
Spoke
He
the
spoke
word.
to it.
He spoke to it. He said, he got up and rebuked the wind and the sea. That's the only time I've ever heard Jesus rebuke an object or a thing of nature. So I don't think he was literally talking to the wind and talking to the waves, because he rebuked it. And rebuking something is, it's a stern reprimand, if you will. There'd be no purpose in rebuking or reprimanding the wind itself. But the thing that was causing the wind, the spirit that was causing the wind, I believe is what he was rebuking. And then he said to the sea, hush, be still. So that was another spirit that was causing the sea to do that. So I believe he was talking to spirits. And also, they responded to him. I don't think the disciples got it because they said, who is this man that even the wind and the waves obey him? Wind and the sea obey him. Well, it wasn't really the wind and the sea that was obeying him. He didn't suspend natural laws and cause anything to change. But the thing that was causing the wind and causing the waves, he spoke directly to it and said, knock it off right now. And they did. It did happen immediately. So Jesus, so far, is going out of his way to go help this guy. He must really, really love, God must really, really love this man and care about him. And again, he's in the depths of sin and paganism and whatnot, yet God still cared about him that deeply. I don't know of any other story in Scripture where Jesus went to such an extreme to minister to somebody. So he not only goes to cross the wind and the waves, and the disciples are scared, they think they're not going to make it, but he gets over to the other side. And it's interesting because this is the worst case of demonization in the Bible, right? So if this man is not demon-possessed, then nobody is demon-possessed. That's my contention. And how do I know he's not demon-possessed? Because if they possess him, they control the man. And if they control the man, then he would have went away from Jesus. But instead, it says, he saw Jesus, ran from a distance. So he was a ways away. He could have took off and got away from Jesus. But he didn't. So at that moment, that man had enough clarity or whatever that he was able to know, I need help, and this is the man that can do it. And I'm going to go to this man, I'm going to get help. And he was able to, if he was truly possessed, which I say there's no such thing, if he was truly possessed, he wouldn't have been able to do that. The demons would have said, there's no way I'm going to let you near him, because we know what's going to be the end result. He's going to kick us out, and it's going to end badly. So, the man also had supernatural strength. That was from the demons. He could break free from the ropes and the chains. That's why the demoniac, when the 7 sons of Sceva, he was able to beat up 7 of them and throw them out and rip their clothes off and whatever, because of the supernatural strength. So that's one of the things that demons can sometimes have. Cut himself. Interesting. What do you think might be behind self-harm in people? Do you think people enjoy cutting themselves? Do you think they're like, but it's really fun. I think I'll just take a razor and just start cutting myself. Now, I know, but I'm not going to allow you to talk. It's psychology. You're going to say it has to do with control?
No.
Feeling control? Then you can talk. Okay, go ahead.
There's actually was several studies done about people that cut themselves, and they did it actually, in certain people, it releases endorphins. So it was a relief instead of hurt.
And that
But I'm
makes
not
sense.
saying it's okay, I'm just saying.
Right. And that's probably true, because your body or your mind compensates a physical injury by trying to give you endorphins, which feel good, chemicals, if you will.
To overpower the pain.
Overpower the pain, right.
The issue is that the first time you cut yourself. you
Exactly.
don't know.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
But the first time they didn't go, oh, this will make me feel better. I'll get the endorphins going.
You don't know.
So also the problem is the endorphins don't last very long, and guess what? Oh man, that hurts. And I don't know about where people cut exactly. I know it's different for different people, but I know if I get cuts in a certain, like on my fingers or whatever, and it's every time you touch them, it's like, man, that hurts. Why would I want to put myself through pain all the time for momentary, whatever you would get out of cutting yourself?
It's dark stuff.
I agree. I'm sure that people that do it probably realize too that there's something to that it's not just
Well, there's
not just a hobby.
yeah. I'm not saying that endorphins are there when the thought arises. So I'm just saying.
Right. Okay.
I have a question about that scripture of Vanessa. I don't think I've ever wondered about this before, but when it says that they pleaded with Jesus not to send them out of the region,
Mm-hmm.
and I looked at the Greek, I'm thinking that can't mean that. But I guess it does. It can mean that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have insight on that?
I may have, but I just realized what time it is,
Oh, other times.
and there's a lot more I want to bring out in this story. So next week, if you want to ask the same question, that'd be great. I'm sorry I kept you 3 or 4 minutes to answer. So let me pray over you real quickly, and we'll turn out. Heavenly Father, Lord, thank you for all those that are gathered here, Lord, to learn more about your word. Lord, let everything from your word that we run across, Lord, sink deep into our heart and sink into our minds, and let your truth pervade our lives, and let us always recognize your truth, but always recognize lies, so that we can turn to the truth instead. So Lord, we thank you so much that you love us, that you would do for us what you did for that demoniac and the Gerasenes. You would just completely reroute Jesus and send him our way. And we're so thankful for how much love you have for us, Lord, we can't even comprehend it. So Lord, we give you praise and glory and honor, and thank you again in Jesus' name. Amen. Conflict in your
Yeah, I'm sorry. It was really cold when we all gathered.
I should have just closed those and not told them or given the idea that the air conditioning is turned off.
Are you an ice eater?
Oh.
Means you have lack of iron.
Well, for 10 years. People are taking iron. It hurt a lot in my
I did that a lot, and then all of a sudden I just quit eating the ice. I don't know why, but
I gotta find something.
Can you cut there?
Let me turn this on.
you're gonna have a good week, huh?
Can you?